Hi everybody, here I am again, and today we've got a very interesting gentleman. He was with me a couple months ago, but we decided that he'd like to come back and tell us a little more about genealogy. You know what genealogy means? That's a word that a lot of people say, what is that? Well, it's learning who you are and your family, where they are, where they came from, all that stuff. And Dave Robison is going to tell us a lot more today than he did the last time. So, am I saying it right?
You absolutely are saying it right. It's perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I know that ever since you came, you've had a couple classes of genealogy at the church, and it was very successful, I hear.
Yes, very much so.
And I went to the first one, but I couldn't get to the second one because it interfered with other things. But it's very interesting when you're trying to find out who, what, and when. And I find that you learn something today, and then tomorrow you learn something, and you match them up to see if they're alike. They're not the same. There's different dates and all that. And so it's very hard to work at it unless you know what you're doing. And you know how to tell us what we should be doing. So,
yeah,
so now you go ahead. You've got a lot of things to tell us. And
I've got a big story for you today.
You've got a big story
today.
Okay.
Absolutely. When you get, I would say, obsessed with genealogy, sometimes you get obsessed with the papers and the census records and the birth records and marriage records, and what you end up with is all this paper with names and dates, and that's great stuff. It's good stuff to have because that's how you find out who your ancestors might be and who your cousins might be. But the piece that sometimes is missing from some people's research is learning who these people are. You know, and I call it putting the people, taking the people out of the paper, putting the meat on the bones, so to speak. Now, how can we talk to the people who lived 100 years ago? We can't.
You can't.
But you can certainly, if you're fortunate enough to have your parents or your grandparents available to speak with, or maybe aunts and uncles, then it's just wonderful to be able to spend some time with them and ask them questions about what it was like when they were growing up. But it has to be something that's pretty much planned. So I wanted to go over a few basics of how to go about interviewing your relatives. So to me, the first step would be to just simply ask them, you know, just get in touch with one of your relatives and say, geez, would you mind if I spent some time with you? Maybe we could put an hour or two aside someday, and you and I can sit down and I can talk to you about a few things with how you know, how and who, what, where, why, and when, growing up in the town you lived in and schools and so forth. But you can't just go over there and sit down and then try to think of the questions. It'll be kind of a waste of your time and theirs. So what I like to do is plan this meeting. So the very first step is to find someone who is willing to speak with you, and then...
Not to interrupt you, but do you ever take and copy them? I mean, or put them on the tape?
Well, that's just what exactly. You know, you always know. You always know what I'm planning, don't you?
I'm reading your mind.
Yeah, you are. Yeah, that's a subject of another show, I suppose. But that's exactly what I was going to talk about. Is getting their permission, because sometimes when you ask somebody if you can tape the conversation, they get nervous and they get intimidated. So you have to get their permission and certainly make sure that they're comfortable with it. Now, a quick story. My father's family is all from Alabama. He grew up in Evergreen, Alabama, and we knew very, very little about them. I did know about Evergreen. I contacted the Historical Society in Evergreen, Alabama, and asked them if they could help me with my family research. They sent me to a woman named Sarah Coker. Oh, you've got to talk to Mrs. Coker. She's been doing research for the longest time. Here's her name, here's her address. So I sent Mrs. Coker a nice letter, dear Mrs. Coker, my name is, and blah, 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 blah. Well, 2 weeks later, I get a letter back from her. She's my great aunt.
Oh my gosh.
Didn't know the woman from, to use her expression, I didn't know her from Adam's house cat. That's one of those deep South expressions that that took me by surprise. I spent hours and hours with her, and I did tape record our conversation. But and how I do it today is there's a little software I have on my computer, and I make the phone call through the computer, and it records the conversation. But first I ask for the permission, and when I get the permission, I tell them I'm going to start the recording, and I'm going to ask you for permission again so that I've got the permission on tape. Okay. But then you just can't launch into a bunch of questions haphazardly. So I found a source that gave me, and there's only 135 or so brief questions here that you might want to go over. But some of these questions, they might sound trivial, and they might say, well, what in the world are you talking about that for? But the purpose of asking these questions is to trigger memories. For example, besides, what did you do for a living and who are your siblings and things like that, talking to them about, I might ask you, for example, where were your grandparents born? Were they born in the United States? Were they born in Europe? When did they come over? Did they come to stay with relatives or friends, or did they just come on there by themselves? But here's an example of some questions that can really be memory triggers. Let's talk about your siblings when you grew up. How many brothers and sisters did you have? Now, can you tell me a little bit about your memories of what it was like to play with them when you were 5, 6, 7 years old? Can you tell me some of the games that you played with your siblings? Now, do you have aunts and uncles? Do you have cousins? Were your cousins playmates of yours? What about your grandmother? Do you remember going to your grandmother's house when you were a kid? Was there a smell to the grandma's cooking? What kind of memories do those smells trigger when you think about what it was like to go over your grandmother's house? By the way, did you call her grandmother? Did you call her grandma? Did you call her granny? What did you call your grandmother and your grandfather? All this starts to trigger, and sometimes you get this, you start these triggers, and it just starts a conversation that's almost never ending. Oh, I remember this and I remember that. I'll tell you a story about Aunt Sarah, who, by the way, would be 105 years old if she were alive today. She admitted to me for the first time in her life that it was her that painted the neighbor's cat blue when she was about 8 years old. I mean, where did that come from? But I got the story.
But had you heard that story
Never.
before?
Oh,
No,
never.
no.
She hadn't even ever told anybody. But we got on such a roll that she was talking about all kinds of different things. So here's a few others. Who were you named after? Were you named after someone special? Did you know the person whom you were named after? Let's see, did you and your family eat at regular meal times? Did you all sit at the dining room table like we expect an American family to do? Rarely do people today eat exactly at 6 o'clock and everybody has to sit. Did you say grace before you started your meal? Where did everybody sit at the table? What did you folks talk about at dinner time? Do you have any heirloom furniture that you got from your parents, your grandparents? Is that furniture still in your house? Is it used? Do you display it? I know I have, what would you call it, a hutch or a china closet. It's probably 150 years old that my grandmother had, and it's in my living room, and we keep things displayed in there, pieces of glass and pictures and so forth. Let's see, did your father or mother have any special sayings that they used to repeat all the time? Do you still use those sayings that your parents used when you were a kid? Was there music in your house? Did you have a radio set? Did you have a television? What was it like? What did you do when you got home from school and your father got home from work? What did you folks do at night? Did you have a delivery person? Did you have a bread man or a dairy man, or did you have maybe a diaper service that came to the house? What can you tell me about those kinds of things? These are little tiny trivial pieces of someone's childhood that you're trying to awaken to get the story of that person. And more than likely, once they get started answering some of these questions, it opens up a whole area of who this person was. Was there a special book that your parents read to you when you were a child? Was there a special book that you read when you were a child? What can you tell me about that? Were you afraid of the monster in the closet when you were a kid? And what were your fears? Who was the monster? How did your parents help you with that when you were young? Tell me about the street where you grew up. Did you live in the city? Did you live in the countryside? Was it a paved road? Was it asphalted? Were there street lights? What did you do at night? Who were the friends that you played with? And you get them to start talking about all these stories. First of all, they're going to forget you're taping it. Absolutely will forget that you're taping the conversation. They'll become more comfortable as they begin to remember the pleasant things about their childhood, and they start to tell you the stories. And you'll probably never, ever get through all these questions because with most people, it just flows. It just starts to flow. Did you have chores when you were a kid? Did you have to rake the lawn? Did you have to sweep the steps? Were you allowed to do this or that before did you have to do your chores before you were allowed to go out and play? God knows if that was the case today, that would be a completely different story. Did you ever go downtown? And if you went downtown, did you walk downtown? Did you take the bus? Did you drive in the car? Where did you go when you went downtown? Can you tell me a story about one time when you and your mom might have taken you downtown to go shopping? What can you tell me about that? Did you have any pets? Do you remember getting the pet? What was the pet's name? Did you lose the pet? And how did you feel when that happened? I can tell you a fast story about my son Mark, who was maybe 4 at the time, and we had a pet rabbit in a hutch out in the backyard. The rabbit's name was Numbers, and, well, sadly, Numbers died, which you would expect a pet to do. Now, I just figured this is going to be a good lesson in life for my son Mark, so I sat Mark down and I said to him, Mark, I have to tell you that Numbers died today. He died? Yes, Mark, and let me just say this. Can we bury him and dig up the bones? It didn't seem to bother him at all, but I was expecting this big, long story. But at any rate, that's a cute little story. All right, pets, and what were their names, and where did you go to school? What was the name of the grammar school you went to? Was that school in the city, or was it rural? Could you walk to school? Did you have to take the bus? If you walked to school, did you walk with your friends? What did you like about that school? What didn't you like about that school? Do you have any favorite teachers, any favorite subjects? Was there uniforms that you had to wear? I know when I went to grade school, it was in a Catholic parochial school, so we certainly had to wear white shirts with a blue tie and dark slacks, so we had a uniform to play. Were there school plays? Did you take part in the plays? Did you have a role? Maybe you sang at in grade school. Tell me about that. Tell me about your high school. And can you see how some of these questions, it's not anything that you would normally sit down and talk to somebody about, but some of these questions, they really almost come out from nowhere, and it just gets the mind thinking. Now, I was in sales for many years, and I was a sales trainer for many years, and certainly the success of some salespeople is to sell a product and then find other people in that person's sphere of influence to sell that same product to. And this is a very, very subtle question to ask somebody. I could say to you, I could sell you a new toaster, for example, and I might say to you, do you know anybody that would like to buy a toaster? And you don't want to think about it, so you just say, no, I don't know anybody right now who want to buy a toaster. But if I phrase the question a little bit differently and say to you, who do you know that needs a new toaster? It immediately causes you to think subliminally.
It's the way you put the question.
Absolutely, and that's what a lot of these questions are geared toward, is to help that person, is to trigger memories and to get them to think about what it was like growing up. What was their favorite breakfast cereal? What did you like for dinner? How many friends did you have? Maybe you didn't have too many friends. What did you like to do after school? And you see, now you're getting a lot more than, geez, what's your name and what's your date of birth and where were you born? Okay, thank you very much, I gotta go. But it starts conversations, and it makes it a very, very, well, hopefully makes it a very, very pleasant experience, because hopefully we're not going to bring up any bad memories necessarily, and hopefully and if it does, maybe they do need to talk about some of these things. And it's just good to get to know somebody as deeply as this, when you really get into their background, get into their, what makes them tick, so to speak. Now, what are you going to do with all this information? First of all, in terms of just making a family tree, you have the names, and you have dates, and you have locations. But now you can write a story. Now you can figure out who this person was and how much more they might mean to you because you know them on such an incredibly personal level that you may not have known them before. And I find it to be very, very helpful to organize a conversation this way, and hopefully do the interview with the relative face to face, sitting at their kitchen table or in their living room, wherever they're comfortable. But if that doesn't work, of course, I mean, I can't run across the street and visit with my cousins in Alabama. You know, it has to be on the telephone. And I can certainly tell you from personal experience that most people really do like to talk about these things, and they enjoy reflecting back on their backgrounds and on their youth, if you will, and telling these kinds of stories to somebody.
I know there's lots of times that I've been doing the genealogy on my family, and I'll come across something that is written up, and it triggers my mind to
Right.
think, oh, I know from what things like, you know,
Right.
so that if you hear something, you're apt to trigger your mind and to learn something else. And you'll say, oh, I know her. I remember her. She did this, or she did that, or she gave me this, or she gave me that.
Right.
You know, I can see where that would be great. Yeah.
And younger people aren't necessarily interested in hearing these stories today, but what a treasure it is if you can put these things together and at least have them all on record and have it all collected in one place, so that someday somebody might be interested in taking a look at it.
Well, I think that sounds great that you've got this list, and I know that as you were asking some of the questions, there were things that I couldn't even answer.
Mm-hmm.
But there are other things that I go, oh yeah, I think I could do that.
Mm-hmm.
But it just gives you an in to how to start doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when you start to do it, you might shy away from some of these because they're bringing, as you said, they're bringing things back in so that you don't have to worry about that part. And I can see that is great. And it's really, I don't know, people that don't look back at their families, they're missing out a lot.
Absolutely. I'll tell you, I have a great-grandfather named Joseph Tuggy who came over from England in 1849, lived in Springfield. Well, actually, he lived in Enfield, Mass, as a matter of fact. And a couple of his descendants still live in that, eastern Hampshire, Hampden County area. And after doing some research, I discovered that there might be a cousin of mine who might still be alive. And I did a little more research, and sure enough, I found her living out in Palmer. Mm-hmm. She's 10 or 15 years older than I, but after approaching her, she was also interested in family history. So we had a common bond there. Yeah. So I asked her if maybe someday we could get together, and I'd like to see if you can identify some of the pictures that I have from that era, and I've got some letters I'd like to show you, and we can just talk. Sure, she loved having us. So Karen and I went up, and we figured we'd spend maybe an hour up there in Palmer. Well, we got there, and I went through the whole tape recording routine. You know, she brought in one of her brothers and sisters, so I got to meet that whole part of the family. And when I started out asking them if I could record the conversation, they were all apprehensive. Oh, I don't know about that. So, but eventually they allowed me to keep the tape recorder running. And after, like I said, after a few minutes, you just forget it's there. Well, we got there about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and we left about 6 o'clock in the evening.
Oh, wow.
We just talked and talked and talked. And many of the pictures I had, she had. And it was quite amazing. And she didn't know who they were either. But she told me some stories about her grandfather, who was my great uncle. We're one generation apart. And as it turns out, her grandfather was a tuba player and played in the band. In the they had a ball at the town hall in Enfield on the last night that the city was going to be, or the town was going to be a city. And they had a big party and a big ball, and my great uncle played the tuba in the band on the night of that ball. But also, interestingly enough, he was almost 7 feet tall. Great. And I have pictures of him, and if you look at him, he was way taller than his wife. And he had a long, what you might call a horse face, and he had huge hands, and he walked kind of funny, and his arms kind of slung around. And there's another guy that was very much like that, had the same general appearance and the same gait and the same characteristics, and he was the president there, Abraham Lincoln. You remember him?
Oh, no.
Yeah, and it's rumored that he had a condition called Marfan's disease, and I'm pretty
So
sure
you think
that
you might have been related to Abraham Lincoln?
well, truthfully, we are distantly, but that's on my father's side. But Aunt Sarah wouldn't talk about it because she's from Alabama. She didn't want anything to do with Abraham Lincoln. But
I know I ran across a person just a couple of weeks ago that is married to someone that has my maiden name, and
really?
I am going to try to contact and see if there's any relation, or any connection, you know.
Yeah.
But I don't want to say it over the television
Sure,
because
I understand. Yeah.
I mean, if he's not related, I mean, I don't want to embarrass him.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
it's interesting that how you can find though people related to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, my mother's family goes back to I actually have a Mayflower ancestor, and I have just hundreds of them from back in that time period. And we were about 6 months ago. We were at church when we were having the combined services, and I overheard somebody talking about how he was descended from somebody who was on the Fortune, which is where my 9th great grandfather came over on a ship called the Fortune in 1621, and I heard him mention that name. And we are cousins. And I told him, I joked with him, I said, we ought to get together every 300 years or so and talk about the family. I didn't.
It's quite interesting. I haven't been able to find too many people. The ones that I knew that were living, most of them are gone, cousins and that. I have half-brothers that are still down in Connecticut that I really don't know too well, but I know where some of them are, and I have kept in touch with some of them. But it was my husband's side of the family that we were very anxious to get information. But I found out that I thought my name being Bach, as my father's name was Bach, and we questioned whether he was related to Johann Sebastian. And I showed you the paper today that a man looked it up, and he found out that Bach did not have any male. And maybe had somewhere along the line there might be one or two, but none that could go down into being in that family.
Right, exactly.
But and I know there were quite 7 or 8 kids, but it's interesting because I plan on doing more of it. I haven't had time really the last couple of months, but when I go to Florida, maybe I can sit down and do some more.
Sure.
Because I know Betsy, my daughter, is very much interested in finding out things too.
Yeah.
But it was. Now, are you going to have any more genealogy?
Oh, sure.
Things?
Yeah, I'll be doing something with the First Church in Ludlow again after the first of the year. I've got a small program working with the Wilbraham Public Library, and I just made arrangements with the Yellow House in Palmer. They wanted a kind of an extended program, so they wanted to have a program that's a little bit more spread out, a little bit more, a little bit more detailed. Also, I've been doing some speaking at some of the libraries around on behalf of the Western Mass Genealogy Society, of which I'm a member, and we're really kind of on a membership campaign trying to get folks to join the Western Mass Genealogy Society. It's $20 a year. There's 10 meetings a year, and we all get together. We have speakers, and we do some, some interesting genealogy things.
Do you ever go over to the church on West Street, and they have a family room there? Is it Latter-day Saints?
The Latter-day Saints. Oh, sure. Yeah, well, yes, I did. I shouldn't say that so easily. Most of what's available there is available online at their website, familysearch.org, and it's free. But if you need guidance and help and assistance, that certainly that's one of the things that I do. But the folks at that church can also help out in some of the research that you're trying to accomplish. They're open. And I wish I had the hours off the top of my head, but I think it's Tuesdays and Wednesdays.
Yeah, I know that.
And it's
not open all the time.
The Wellivers, Pat and Welliver.
I went there one day, and I was very, very disappointed because the person that was there had just started working and didn't know how to work the paper things.
Sure,
and they had things that you could show on
Right.
television and stuff.
Right.
Not television, but on cable like this.
Right.
But on not cable either. Good old you know what.
But they're nice people over there.
Yes,
and
they are very helpful.
Yeah.
I used to go up when they were up in Amherst, and we used to go there and got a lot of information up there.
Sure.
But it's hard for someone who, like my situation, that we don't have anyone around that knows anything. Everybody's gone, and so, and I should have done this when I was a teenager.
That's exactly my point with these interviews.
Yeah.
Is that you can't do them soon enough.
That's right.
Because once the person's gone, they're gone.
That's right.
And all those memories go with
So we
them.
should tell you people out there, if
Absolutely.
you want to find out, start now. Don't wait till it's too late. Because maybe Aunt Susie is living now, but a couple months from now, she may be gone. If she is now, maybe she can tell you things that she will take with her.
That's right.
So it's going to be, it's quite a thing.
They're real treasures. I mean, the little stories that, they're not headline stories that you could put in the newspaper, but they're little stories that should be important to you because it's your family. It's your family.
The thing that I get a kick out of is you go in and look for a name, a last name, and some of the places will give you a list of names that are on that family, and it's unreal because you get it like Bach, Brooks, and the B-A-U, B-O-C-K, B-O-O-K.
Yeah.
I mean, all these names, and you wonder, are they related to me?
Well, in Alabama, my last name is pronounced Robison. Now, 150 years ago, you're an illiterate farmer. Not that there's anything wrong with being illiterate, because my fourth great grandfather had 700 acres of farmland. It was very successful, but was illiterate, and his name was Hezekiah Robison. Now, how do you spell it, Robison? When he was in the War of 1812, his records were spelled Robinson and Robison, the way we spell it today, as well as Robertson. And his widow had an awful time. It took her 44 years to collect her widow's pension from the government because it was a nightmare. But even on his tombstone, in the Robinson Cemetery on Robinson Road in Robinson Hollow, which was the site of his farm from back in the early 1800s, his tombstone his name is spelled R-O-B-R-S-O-N, because that's what they heard. So that's what they wrote. There you have it. And I couldn't get past that roadblock until I started to realize that, well, duh, they could have spelled it
That's
differently.
right. Well, it's just like my mother's name, Cannon, was C-A-N-N-A-N, O-N,
Right.
U-N,
L,
I-N.
yep.
I mean, wow. But
Yep.
we found out it was C-A-N-N-O-N.
In most cases, because you'll still
Yeah.
find it misspelled different ways. Let me just spell a myth real quick about Ellis Island, since you're bringing up the spelling of names. No one's name was changed at Ellis Island. There isn't a stitch of evidence that any immigrant had their name changed at Ellis Island. The paperwork that they worked with at Ellis Island, or any port where immigrants were allowed in, came from the port that they left from, and the ship's manifest had their names, and those ship's manifests were written in Europe. So that's what these folks are working with. That's number one. Number two, they hired people that spoke almost every language on earth to work at Ellis Island, and they really didn't have any interest in changing somebody's name. So nobody whose name was, I don't know, Finkelstein got changed to Smith. I mean, that just simply didn't happen. They may have misspelled it, but there was no overt changing of anyone's name. And people love to say that, well, my name is this, but it was that, because when my grandfather came through Ellis Island, they changed his name because they didn't like it. Well, that didn't happen.
I know that over in Europe, too, you'll run into people say Richard, and then you'll see Richard's son. Well, that's because he's the son of Richard.
And that's a naming convention. The Swedes, for example.
That's right.
Anders had a son, and the son's name became Anderson.
That's right.
And then it just goes down generation after generation after generation. And doctor, the daughter of.
That's right.
That's how those naming conventions work. Yeah.
Well, do you think that you've given us enough information today?
I can spend the rest of the day with you.
I don't think that we can do that. This program's
Well, let me ask
coming
you
on
a couple
here.
of questions here.
Okay.
Did you go to your class reunion?
Oh, yes.
You did. And were you glad you went to your class reunion?
Oh, yes.
And what did you learn about yourself and about your class after when you went to the reunion after being out of school for 10 years or more?
Well, we had been, my reunion was about the 25th reunion.
Okay.
And I found out that a lot of people knew me by Brooks, not Bach. And I learned what some of the kids are doing now, and it was different. It was I didn't know what to expect. You know, it was one of those things that you go and you think, oh, who am I going to see? And of course, we only had about 35 in our class, so we didn't have too many at the reunions. And then when you get there and there's only about 6 or 8 showing up, you find out, well, this one's gone and this one's gone. Because you see, living where I live is too far away from Essex, Connecticut, so that I wouldn't keep track of who's doing what and when and why.
Now, I asked you a simple question, and
I'm going on.
And I love it. I mean,
That's right.
you're just making my point for me. Is that I just stirred up some memories, and now you're telling me wonderful stuff about about growing up. One more question: if Lillian of today could speak to Lillian of high school age, what advice would you give her?
Go to college.
Okay. Yeah, well, that was easy enough, huh? Good advice. Great advice.
It would have been, yeah.
And stay in college, right?
And I say now that any of these youngsters that are going to high school, keep in mind that college is very important. It wasn't quite as important when I was growing up because people didn't have college educations, and therefore you weren't vying against somebody with a college education. But nowadays, if you don't have a college education, you have trouble right away.
Absolutely.
The question is, did you go to college? And what did you study? You know? Yeah.
Well, the next time we sit down with these questions, I'm going to bring a tape recorder. Would that be all right with you?
Fine with me. You'll hear all this, what you've got, when you get your tape.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I thank you very much for coming, and I'm
always a pleasure.
I'm sure that you've enjoyed it too.
Absolutely.
Because I know how much you love your genealogy.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, everybody out there, remember now, and you can get a hold of Dave, and he would answer questions for you, I'm sure. And when he has his next class, and at the First Church, maybe you might be interested in going to it.
It'll be advertised in the local papers.
It'll be, yes.
And it'll be at my website at www.oldbones.co, not .com, oldbones.co.
Okay. And of course, we forgot to say hello from Buttercup. And I am trying to find his genealogy, but I'm telling you, it's not easy. One place I asked for information, they said that the town hall had been burned down and all the records had been burned with them.
Wow.
So then Dave told me that there should be records in Maine somewhere, because when a person is born, the records go to the headquarters, not only to the town that they live in.
Right, state capitals.
So Buttercup says, bye everybody, and we'll see you next week.
Bye now.